Have you ever noticed how religion often pressures people to act, but rarely gives them space to ask why? It tells us to serve, to sacrifice, to stay busy, yet barely encourages us to pause and reflect on what truly matters or why we're doing any of it. Welcome to Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be taking a look at 3 readings from the Christian Bible through the lens of sacred myth. As we reflect on the readings for the 16th Sunday in Ordinary Time, we'll explore the tension between action and reflection, between doing good and discerning what's good, between blindly following orders and intentionally living out our values. In this episode, we're asking a simple but important question. What would it look like to live a life that's not just full, but a life that's truly aligned? A life where our actions flow from thoughtful, personal values and not from religious guilt, fear, or feelings of obligation. So grab a comfy seat, a glass of your favorite beverage, and let's look at some ancient stories together in this edition of Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be exploring the readings for the 16th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle C of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. In this series, we're exploring readings from the Bible through the lens of sacred myth, looking for interpretations and lessons that don't demand a belief in the supernatural. What that means from a practical standpoint is that we will assume that these stories and writings are fiction, written by pre-scientific people with their own agendas and different audiences. Now, you might agree with the lessons I find, but I encourage you to look for something that rings true to you. Part of the beauty of understanding these writings as sacred myths is that we're free to interpret them for ourselves. We're free to learn the lessons that we need right now. So with that, let's dive in. As I said, tonight we'll be looking at the readings for the 16th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle C. Our first reading is from the book of Genesis. It's chapter 18, verses 1 through 10a. Our second reading is from the letter to the Colossians. It's chapter 1, verses 24 through 28. And our gospel reading is from Luke. It's chapter 10, verses 38 through 42. Now we'll start by going through all 3 of the readings, then we'll look for the messages and the main lesson in each one. Finally, we'll bring everything together, look at what it means for us today, and talk about where we go from here. So with that, let's begin. Our first reading is from the book of Genesis. The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre, while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat so you can be refreshed and then go on your way, now that you have come to your servant." "Very well," they answered, "do as you say." So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah. "Quick," he said, "get 3 measures of the finest flour and knead it and bake some bread." Then he ran to the herd and selected a choice, tender calf and gave it to a servant who hurried to prepare it. He then brought some curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them. While they ate, he stood near them under a tree. "Where is your wife, Sarah?" they asked. "There in the tent," he said. Then one of them said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." Our second reading is from Paul's letter to the Colossians. "Brothers and sisters, now I rejoice in what I am suffering for you, and I fill up in my flesh what is still lacking in regard to Christ's afflictions, for the sake of his body, which is the church. I have become its servant by the commission of God, who gave me to present to you the Word of God in its fullness, the mystery that has been kept hidden for ages and generations, but is now disclosed to the Lord's people. To them God has chosen to make known among the Gentiles the glorious riches of this mystery, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. He is the one we proclaim, admonishing and teaching everyone with all wisdom, so that we may present everyone fully mature in Christ. To this end I strenuously contend with all the energy Christ so powerfully works in me. And our gospel reading is from Luke. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." All right, so let's go back and take a critical look at these readings and see what learnings and lessons we can find if we dig around just a little bit. So our first reading was from the book of Genesis, and this reading offers a sort of a curious mix of social custom, reverence, and reward. Abraham welcomes 3 mysterious travelers and just pulls out all the stops. Water for their feet, shade under a tree, freshly baked bread, and a full meal. It sounds generous. But the text also tells us that the Lord appeared to Abraham. In other words, Abraham wasn't just hosting strangers, he was entertaining a divine visitor, and he knew it ahead of time. So that raises the question, would he have gone to all that trouble if he hadn't thought it was God dropping by? And let's be honest, if we're only generous when we think someone important is watching, that's not hospitality. That's networking. It's not necessarily wrong, but it's completely different. The real power of this story emerges when we strip away the supernatural, because underneath the mythological setup is a basic human truth. People need each other. In harsh environments, like the desert lands Abraham lived in, hospitality wasn't just polite, it was often survival. Welcoming a stranger might be the difference between life and death. That's still true in many ways today. And we don't need burning bushes or divine messengers to tell us it's good to help others. When we offer kindness, generosity, or even just a safe place to rest, we're creating a better, more humane world. There's no miracles required. Sadly enough, in today's world, extending hospitality almost always seems conditional. All right, hospitality, it depends on someone's appearance, their religion, their language, maybe their immigration status. But what if we acted like everyone who showed up on our doorstep mattered? Not because we're afraid of offending God or losing out on blessings, but simply because kindness is the right thing to do. We're at our best when we help others, not out of obligation or fear, but because we recognize their humanity. And then we choose to respond with our own. So the main lesson I got from our first reading is that extending hospitality to others is the right thing to do. It's easy to admire Abraham's generosity in this story, but let's not forget it was prompted by what he thought was a divine encounter. The kind of hospitality that really changes the world doesn't need a supernatural prompt. It just needs empathy. Every time we open a door, offer a seat, or listen with compassion, we're doing something profoundly human. And we don't do it because we expect to be blessed. We do it because it's the right thing to do. Extending hospitality to others is the right thing to do. Our second reading was from the letter to the Colossians. And in this reading, Paul is doing what Paul does pretty well, maybe what Paul does best. He's writing with passion, a touch of drama, and a whole heaping help of self-importance. He talks about rejoicing in his own suffering because it somehow continues the afflictions of Christ. Look, for centuries, that line has been used to glorify suffering itself, as if pain were the point. But let's be real. Suffering is not inherently noble. It's not a badge of honor all on its own. Suffering should not be the goal. The value isn't in the suffering. The value is in the reason behind the sacrifice. What makes someone noble isn't how much they hurt. It's how far they're willing to go to help others. There's a big difference between choosing to make sacrifices for something meaningful and embracing suffering because someone told you it makes you holy. And unfortunately, a lot of religious traditions blur that line. And they take pride in struggle, and they promote self-denial as spiritual ideals. But instead of encouraging people to persevere for justice or peace or healing, they just romanticize the suffering itself. It's a recipe for burnout, for shame, and frankly for people staying in unhealthy situations because they think their pain somehow proves their worth. But Paul wasn't entirely off base. When we shift the focus away from divine mandates and back onto human impact, there's something very admirable in the idea of choosing discomfort for some greater good. Whether it's speaking up when it would be easier to just shut your mouth and stay quiet, donating time or money when your own resources are kind of tight, or standing beside someone who's being mistreated. Those kinds of sacrifices matter. They show commitment. They show courage and care. That's not suffering for suffering's sake. That's choosing to be part of something bigger than yourself. So the main lesson I got from our second reading is that it's okay to make sacrifices for a noble cause. Sacrifices aren't what make us good. Sacrifices are what good people are sometimes willing to make. When we frame sacrifice as a purposeful act, rather than some sort of measure of holiness, we give people the freedom to act with integrity and compassion without glorifying their pain. So let's stop celebrating suffering and instead celebrate the good that can come when we willingly give something up in service of something better. It's okay to make sacrifices for a noble cause. Okay, our final reading was from the Gospel of Luke. And this rather short passage often gets reduced to a personality test. Are you a Martha or a Mary? But that's missing the bigger point. Martha was busy doing what she thought needed to be done. Taking care of the house, showing hospitality, being productive. Meanwhile, Mary sat and listened. Now in this story, Mary is the one who gets praised. That might seem unfair at first, but think about it. In a world that constantly tells us to hustle and prove our worth by what we accomplish, what if the real value is in slowing down, listening, and reflecting? This story isn't about laziness versus work ethic. That should be obvious. It's about presence. Martha was doing what society expected. Mary was doing what her heart needed. And maybe that's the key. Sometimes before we act, or while we're in the middle of acting, we need to pause and ask, why am I doing this? What's driving me? Because when we take the time to explore our motivations, our beliefs, and our values, that's when we gain real clarity. We stop running on autopilot. And suddenly, our actions are rooted in something deeper. They're rooted in something much more intentional. And this story is also a subtle reminder that reflection isn't a luxury. Reflection is essential. You can't build a meaningful life if you never stop to think about what matters to you. You can't be truly generous if you don't understand why you're giving. You can't lead with empathy if you don't take time to develop it. So yes, help others. Do the work. Be a Martha when the moment calls for it. But don't forget to be a Mary too. Don't forget to pause, listen, and connect with your core values. So the main lesson I got from our gospel reading is that we need to take time to explore our core values. In a world that rewards constant doing, taking time to simply be, time to reflect, to question, to listen to your inner voice, that's a radical act of self-leadership. It's how we grow, how we heal, and how we make sure the things we do actually line up with who we want to be. So don't just keep moving ahead. Make time to think and to feel. Make time to explore what's underneath it all. Explore what's underneath all the actions that you're taking and the decisions that you're making. We need to take time to explore our core values. All right, let's review the lessons we've talked about so far. In our first reading from Genesis, the main lesson I came away with was extending hospitality to others is the right thing to do. In our second reading from Colossians, the main lesson I got was it's okay to make sacrifices for a noble cause. And finally, the main lesson I got from our gospel reading was we need to take time to explore our core values. When we think about living a good life, one that actually means something, it's not just about constantly doing or about endlessly thinking. It's about the balance between those two. When we give generously, support a cause, or show up for someone in need, those actions carry the most weight when they're grounded in a very clear sense of purpose. We're not here to run ourselves ragged in the name of self-sacrifice, but we aren't meant to just sit in silence and endlessly ponder either. The sweet spot, the place where real change happens, is when thoughtful reflection drives compassionate action. So take time to know your why. Then let that guide your what. Because the most powerful force in the world isn't just empathy or discipline or wisdom. The most powerful force in the world is putting all of those together and using them to intentionally make life better for the people around us. So let's step back and take another look at these readings overall and see if we can figure out what these lessons really mean to us in our daily lives. To do this, I'll try to answer two questions. So what? And now what? Okay, so what? Why should we care about any of this? Well, we should care about this because too many people let religion do their thinking for them. When your answer to every ethical question is, because the Bible says so, or because my pastor said so, you've outsourced your moral compass. And while that might feel safe or certain, it's a false certainty. It stops the process of discernment dead in its tracks. If we really want to live with intention, we have to be willing to wrestle with the hard questions ourselves and not just repeat what we've been told. This is important because naming a value isn't the same as living that value. Right, let's say you believe compassion is one of your core values. Fantastic. That's something I talk about a lot. So you believe compassion is one of your core values. But what does that actually mean in your life? Is compassion something you feel only toward people you agree with? Is it something you offer quietly or with boundaries? Right? How does it show up when you're tired, angry, or feeling overwhelmed? Saying you value something is easy. Living it with both clarity and consistency, well, that takes work. And that work starts with self-reflection. We should care about this because reflection without action doesn't change anything. It's not enough to sit around gazing at our navels and thinking about our values. You've got to test them out in the real world. Try them on. See what fits. See what happens when you make a decision based on your best understanding of compassion or justice or honesty or whatever core value it is. And then watch the results. Did it go how you thought it would? Why or why not? That feedback loop. Reflect, act, observe, and repeat. That's how discernment helps us grow. It's how you go from theory to transformation. This is important because beliefs handed down without discernment often become harmful. Too many people cling to dogma they can't actually explain or defend, not because it makes sense, but because it was drilled into them early on. They were indoctrinated into those beliefs. But that's not strength. That's just conditioning. And when those beliefs start to hurt other people or ourselves, we need to have the courage to ask, is this really true? Is it still true? Faith doesn't have to mean blind obedience. And values don't have to be inherited. They can be chosen deliberately, thoughtfully, and with purpose. If we want to live good, meaningful lives, and if we want to help others do the same, we've got to stop copying and start discerning. Because knowing your why isn't just helpful. It's downright necessary. All right, the last question I try to answer is, now what? What are we supposed to do? Where do we go from here? Well, let's be honest. A lot of us live on autopilot. We say we care about certain values. We try to do good. We respond to things as they happen. But we rarely stop to ask if what we're doing actually lines up with what we say matters to us the most. That's why the feedback loop we just talked about, reflect, act, observe, repeat. So that feedback loop is so important. It helps us break out of mindless repetition and start living with real clarity and with a lot more intentionality. So with that in mind, here's your challenge for the week. Use the feedback loop. Reflect, act, observe, repeat. Use that feedback loop with one specific core value. The goal is to help you try out that feedback loop in a sort of a simple, low-stress kind of way. So pick one value that's important to you, just one. It might be compassion or fairness, honesty, patience, whatever feels right to you. Pick one core value. Then just find one situation this week where you can intentionally act on that value and then pay attention to what happens. Right? Reflect on the value, act on it, observe what happens. And afterward, take 5 minutes to reflect on how it went. Ask yourself, did my actions reflect that value well? Did it help? Was there a cost? Would I do anything differently next time? If you're feeling particularly ambitious, jot down a few notes and then do it all again later in the week. Act, observe, and reflect. 2 cycles, one value. Right? That's it. Taking the challenge is worth your time because this is how you turn vague beliefs into practiced wisdom. Anyone can say they value honesty, but it's a whole different thing to make an honest choice, reflect on how it turned out, and then use that insight to grow and to live that value even more effectively the next time. That's also how values become habits. And that's how our ability to discern actually gets better. When I was a junior in college, I took a year off to work a full-time internship at a Jesuit retreat center outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. And one of the things that we learned how to do after any activity was to facilitate a discussion and help the participants process the experience. They had just experienced something, but that didn't mean they would automatically learn from it. So we would sit them down, usually a group of high school students, and start by encouraging them to describe the experience, right? Describe what happened. We were teaching them to observe, right? They acted, right? They took part in the experience, and then we asked them to talk about what it was like, right? To kind of observe what they were feeling at the time, what was easy, what was challenging. Right? We simply helped them to take a step back, observe, and describe the experience. Then we'd help them reflect. Right? What did that mean? What did they learn? Was there anything surprising, or did it reinforce something they already knew or already believed? Are there any broader implications? How can they carry this forward into their everyday lives? Again, the goal was to help them reflect more deeply on the experience and on their observations of that experience. This is the exact same feedback loop I use every day, especially when I journal. I've been using this feedback loop literally for decades, in my personal life, in my years of ministry with Catholic teens, and definitely at work. Right? This feedback loop, act, observe, reflect, and then repeat, is an all-purpose tool, and I can't begin to tell you how important it's been to my success over the years. But for our purposes, for this challenge, we're just focusing on one core value. When you practice this feedback loop, even in small ways, you start building a stronger connection between your inner compass and your outer behavior. It's like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it becomes and the more natural it feels. And that's how you stop living by default, stop living on autopilot, and start living by design. So go ahead, pick your value, act, observe, reflect, and repeat. Learning this one simple intentional feedback loop can dramatically change how you show up in the world. Well, before I wrap things up, I'd like to leave you with one more thought. American philosopher and psychologist John Dewey once wrote, "We do not learn from experience. We learn from reflecting on experience." It's easy to assume that just doing things will help us grow. That if we keep showing up, keep trying, keep pushing forward, we'll naturally become wiser, more grounded, more aligned with who we want to be. But Dewey reminds us that experience alone isn't the teacher. It's reflection. It's what we do after the action that really locks in the insight. That's exactly why this week's challenge, act, observe, reflect, repeat, why that matters so much. Because we don't just become better people by making compassionate choices once or twice. We become better people by really looking closely at those moments, by clearly identifying the lessons we can learn from them, and then by choosing to improve or realign the next time. We become better people when we intentionally learn lessons and intentionally act upon those lessons going forward. That's how you develop values that are lived, not just values that are listed in a journal entry somewhere. So don't skip the observation and reflection. Don't rush past the part where the learning happens. Don't always be a Martha. Take time to be a Mary. Because that's where personal growth actually begins. All right, we've come to the end of this episode. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back again next week. But in the meantime, I encourage you to engage with our challenge for the week. But also pay attention to any important lessons you come across wherever you find them. You'll create a more purposeful and joyful life, and you'll start to feel more connected to the world and the people around you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mythologizing the Bible as we did a deeper dive into the readings for the 16th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle C of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. Remember that the most powerful force in the world is learning lessons and using them to intentionally make life better for ourselves and for the people around us. The Bible readings used for this episode are from the Holy Bible, New International Version, NIV. Copyright 1973, 1978, 1984, and 2011 by Biblica Inc. Used by permission, all rights reserved worldwide. Thank you for listening. If you like this content, please consider telling a friend about it. The more people who hear the positive messages I'm sharing, the better. Mythologizing the Bible is a live-streamed series held most Thursdays at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on twitch.tv/thecodaproject. Every week, the audio of these Mythologizing the Bible presentations is released as a podcast. You can find both the podcast and the occasional video versions of the presentations at thecodaproject.com. CODA stands for Creating Our Divine Alignment. When we learn to align our words and actions with our core values, that alignment feels absolutely exquisite. It feels divine. But it's a divine alignment that doesn't require belief in the supernatural. It's a divine alignment we have the ability to create for ourselves. To learn more, to subscribe to my mailing list, and to keep up on everything I'm doing with the Coda Project, please visit thecodaproject.com.